Mindfulness, a space for slowing down, breathing deeply, and rediscovering the simple truths that make life worth living. I used to think freedom meant being able to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. No rules, no limits, just open roads and open choices. It sounded intoxicating, like a never-ending summer where no one could tell me no. But somewhere along that journey, I learned an unexpected truth. The real test of freedom isn't how much you can do, it's how much you can choose not to do. Think about it. You can have the keys to a car, but if you press the gas every time without control, you'll crash. You can have unlimited access to food, but without knowing when to stop, you'll lose your health. You can have 1,000 options for your time, but without choosing wisely, life becomes cluttered, scattered, and strangely empty. In the United States, where personal liberty is often celebrated as a cornerstone of identity, this paradox can be hard to swallow. We're told to follow our dreams, live without limits, and never settle. And yes, those messages can be inspiring, but they can also quietly push us into exhaustion, chasing everything, committing to nothing. Some of the most influential meditation teachers in America, like Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, and Jon Kabat-Zinn, speak about freedom not as the absence of boundaries, but as the ability to live consciously within them. Kornfield often shares that discipline is not a punishment, it's the training of the mind and heart. Salzberg talks about loving kindness as a way of choosing connection over reaction. Kabat-Zinn reminds us that mindfulness isn't about escaping life, but inhabiting it fully, moment by moment. Even the teachings of the Buddha point in this direction. Freedom, according to the Dharma, comes not from indulging every desire, but from understanding them, and sometimes from letting them go entirely. It's the kind of liberation that comes when you're no longer pulled around by every craving, fear, or impulse. For me, this shift began in a simple moment. I was scrolling late at night, just one more video, just one more post, and suddenly realized I was more tired than entertained. I put my phone down, turned off the light, and fell asleep instantly. The next morning, I felt free. It wasn't that I'd done something extraordinary. I'd just chosen to stop. That choice, tiny as it was, made me feel more in control than all the freedom of staying up could have offered. Freedom and self-limitation may sound like opposites, but they're actually dance partners. One gives you space, the other gives you shape. One is the ocean, the other is the shoreline. And together, they create a place where life can flow beautifully without flooding everything in its path. I remember meeting a man in California who had built his life around surfing. Every morning, rain or shine, he was out there on the water before sunrise. When I asked him what kept him so disciplined, he smiled and said, "If I surf every time I feel like it, I'd miss half the good waves. The best ones come when you stick to a rhythm, even when it's cold and you'd rather stay in bed." That stuck with me. We tend to think discipline takes away our freedom, but in truth, it often protects it. Without it, we get swept away by the loudest impulse in the moment. With it, we create space for what actually matters. Jon Kabat-Zinn, one of America's most respected voices in mindfulness, has often said that you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. This isn't just about sports. It's about life. We can't stop responsibilities, disappointments, or the unexpected. But by practicing restraint, the choice to pause, breathe, and not act on every urge, we learn to ride life instead of drowning in it. The Buddha spoke about this in the form of the middle way. Not the extremes of indulgence or denial, but the balance between them. That balance isn't boring. It's actually where the deepest freedom lives. It's like tuning a guitar string. Too tight and it snaps. Too loose and it won't play. But just right and it sings. One of my friends, a busy corporate lawyer in New York, told me about a shift she made in her life. "I used to say yes to every opportunity," she said. "I thought that's what successful people did, maximize every door that opened. But I was exhausted and never fully present in any of it. Then I started saying no, a lot. At first it felt wrong. Then it felt like breathing again." What she learned, and what many meditation teachers remind us, is that saying no to some things is what makes our yes more powerful. We don't diminish our life by limiting it. We actually make it richer. Sharon Salzberg, whose work on loving kindness meditation has touched millions, explains it beautifully. Mindfulness isn't about getting rid of thoughts or emotions. It's about seeing them clearly and then deciding how you want to respond. That's the key, the space between impulse and action. It's where freedom is born. This isn't about self-denial for the sake of it. It's about noticing what's pulling you, asking if it's really what you want, and having the courage to step back when it isn't. Sometimes the most powerful freedom you can give yourself is the freedom not to follow the crowd, the trend, or even your own momentary desire. And here's the twist. The more you practice that kind of restraint, the less you feel like you're holding back at all. It starts to feel natural, even joyful. Like a surfer catching the perfect wave. You're no longer fighting the water, you're moving with it. A few years ago, I spent time with a meditation group in Boston. It was a small circle, nurses, students, a retired firefighter, and a couple of young parents who somehow managed to show up every Tuesday evening. One night, a man named Carl shared something that hit me hard. I used to think my freedom was being able to work whenever I wanted, eat whatever I wanted, watch whatever I wanted, he said. But the truth is, I was trapped in my own habits. I wasn't choosing anymore. I was just reacting. That's the thing most of us don't notice right away. Doing whatever we want all the time can quietly turn into a cage. The bars aren't made of steel. They're made of repetition, craving, and autopilot living. Buddhist teacher Joseph Goldstein, one of the pioneers of insight meditation in the US, often talks about the difference between freedom of choice and freedom from compulsion. The first is about having options. The second, the deeper kind, is about not being dragged around by every passing urge. And that second kind often requires boundaries we set for ourselves. Think about food in America. We live in a land where you can order a double cheeseburger at midnight, have groceries delivered in under an hour, and keep your fridge stocked with anything you crave. But if we eat without awareness, without restraint, we quickly lose touch with what our body actually needs. Freedom without mindfulness can turn into its own form of suffering, just a comfortable one. It's the same in relationships. In the age of dating apps and constant connection, you can always swipe for something new. But people who jump from one relationship to another often discover that unlimited choice doesn't always bring deeper connection. In fact, real intimacy, the kind that makes you feel safe and alive, usually comes from staying, from working through discomfort, from choosing the same person over and over again. And in work, especially in the American hustle culture, we're told to say yes to every opportunity. But without the courage to say no, we end up overwhelmed, overbooked, and undernourished. The most successful people I've met, including entrepreneurs and leaders who meditate, aren't the ones who chase everything. They're the ones who focus deeply on a few things and let the rest go. Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, though Vietnamese by origin, became a profound influence in American mindfulness circles. He taught that freedom is not doing whatever you want, but mastering your habits so they don't master you. This mastery doesn't come from force. It comes from awareness. Here's the beautiful irony. The moment you start consciously limiting yourself, you realize you've opened up far more space to live. You feel lighter because you're not carrying the weight of every option, every distraction, every maybe in the world. You're finally free enough to go deep instead of wide. Balancing freedom and self-limitation isn't something you figure out once and keep forever. It's more like tending a garden. You've ever turn to it again and again, noticing what's grown wild and gently trimming it so the things that matter can truly flourish. The beautiful part is you don't need to retreat to a monastery or spend hours each day meditating. Small, consistent choices can shift everything. One of the most powerful habits I've learned comes from Sharon Salzberg. She calls it the sacred pause. Before saying yes, before sending that text, before hitting buy now, I simply take a breath. 3 to 5 seconds of stillness is enough to ask myself, do I really want this, or am I just reacting? That short pause often changes my decision entirely. In a culture that glorifies multitasking, choosing to focus on one thing at a time feels almost rebellious. Whether it's answering emails, eating lunch, or having a conversation, I've found that doing just one thing makes me calmer, sharper, and more present. It's a kind of self-limitation that doesn't shrink my life, it expands it. John Kabat-Zinn once said, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." For me, part of learning to surf life's chaos is creating space in my calendar for nothing at all. Empty time isn't wasted time. It's the breathing room where rest, creativity, and clarity happen. I've learned to guard that space the way I would guard a meeting with someone important. Because in a way, I am. That someone is me. Joseph Goldstein often reminds his students that every yes is also a no to something else. This thought made me realize how casually I was spending my time. When I agree to one more meeting, one more favor, I might be saying no to a walk at sunset, a quiet evening with a book, or going to bed early. Learning to value my no has been one of the most freeing changes in my life. Another shift came when I set a curfew for my technology. For me, that means no phone after 9 at night and no social media during the first hour of my morning. Thich Nhat Hanh taught that our minds, like our bodies, need rest. Shutting down the constant flow of information gives my mind the same kind of renewal a good night's sleep gives my body. And then there's gratitude. Something so simple, yet so quietly powerful. Every night before bed, I write down 3 things I'm grateful for. It slows the endless wanting that our culture often feeds and reminds me that I already have enough. The more I focus on what's here, the less I feel pulled toward what's not. When I started weaving these practices into my life, I noticed something subtle but life-changing. My days no longer blurred together. Meals tasted richer. Conversations felt more alive. Even my time alone seemed to have more weight. By limiting what I let in, I found that what I kept became infinitely more precious. I once attended a retreat in Barre, Massachusetts, home to one of the most respected meditation centers in the United States. Joseph Goldstein was teaching that week, and during a group discussion, someone asked him what freedom really means. He smiled in that calm, knowing way and said, "It's not that you can do whatever you want. It's that you don't have to do what you don't want, even when your mind tells you otherwise." The room fell silent. You could feel everyone thinking about the ways they had been pulled along by habit without even realizing it. Jack Kornfield tells a story about a monk who came to him struggling with restlessness. The monk kept moving from one monastery to another, looking for the perfect place. Jack gently told him, "You can change monasteries 100 times, but if you don't learn to sit still in your own mind, you'll never find peace." It was a reminder that true freedom isn't found by escaping limits, but by learning to rest within them. I've also seen this truth in people who aren't spiritual teachers at all. A friend of mine in San Francisco runs a small bakery. At first, she wanted to offer every kind of pastry she could imagine. Croissants, cookies, cakes, pies. Her menu was endless, and so were her hours. She was exhausted. One day, she cut the menu in half and started closing the shop at 3 in the afternoon. Her business didn't suffer. In fact, it grew. With fewer options, her customers knew exactly what to expect, and she had more time to rest, experiment, and enjoy her craft. Sharon Salzberg once shared how she applied loving-kindness meditation not just toward people she cared about, but toward herself when she set boundaries. She realized that saying no wasn't selfish. It was a way of caring for her own well-being, so she could continue to give from a place of fullness, not depletion. That shift changed her teaching, making it softer yet more powerful. I think about a man I met in a mindfulness group in Los Angeles. He had been sober for 3 years, and when someone asked how he managed it, he didn't list a dozen steps or programs. He simply said, "I limit what I expose myself to. That's my freedom." For him, self-limitation wasn't a punishment. It was a shield that protected the life he wanted to live. Stories like these remind me that the balance between freedom and limits isn't abstract philosophy. It's something you can touch, taste, and feel. It's in the baker choosing to close early. It's in the recovering addict choosing where not to go. It's in the teacher who chooses a pause over a reaction. Every one of these choices is a quiet declaration. I'm in charge of my life, not my impulses. And the most surprising thing? These people don't seem smaller for their limits. They seem bigger, like they've expanded into a deeper, steadier version of themselves. Their lives aren't narrower, they're richer. And that richness, I've learned, is what real freedom looks like. The longer I've practiced mindfulness, the more I've realized this balance isn't just personal. It has the power to shape how communities thrive, how workplaces function, and even how a culture defines success. What works for an individual, that steady dance between openness and boundaries, can ripple outward in surprising ways. I once visited a small town in Vermont where the community had decided to limit business hours on Sundays. Not because of law, but because they wanted to preserve one day for rest, family, and neighborly connection. At first, it felt strange to walk through streets with most shops closed. But by the afternoon, I noticed something. People were sitting on porches, kids were riding bikes, neighbors were stopping in the street to talk. That simple collective choice to limit commerce for a day created a kind of shared spaciousness that you could feel in the air. In workplaces, the same principle applies. I worked with a nonprofit in Seattle that set a hard rule: no emails after 6 p.m. and no meetings on Fridays. It was a boundary everyone agreed to honor, and instead of lowering productivity, it increased it. People came in on Monday fresher, more creative, and actually looking forward to collaborating. The executive director told me, "We didn't lose output, we lost burnout." It was a clear example of how limits, when embraced intentionally, can protect freedom in the long run. American culture often glorifies more hours, more connections, more opportunities. But the more I listen to teachers like John Kabat-Zinn and Sharon Salzberg, the more I see that enough can be far more powerful than more. Communities that recognize this tend to build stronger trust. Teams that practice it often foster deeper loyalty. Even families that set collective limits, like shared screen-free dinners or designated quiet hours, often find their relationships deepen. Thich Nhat Hanh once said that peace in the world begins with peace in ourselves. But it doesn't end there. A mindful individual can influence a family. A mindful family can influence a neighborhood. A mindful neighborhood can influence an entire culture. Imagine if more American workplaces built in stillness instead of squeezing every second for output. Imagine if cities planned spaces not just for speed and commerce, but for rest and connection. This isn't wishful thinking. It's already happening in pockets across the country, in co-working spaces that schedule collective meditation breaks, in schools introducing mindfulness programs, in urban gardens that bring neighbors together to slow down and grow food. These are living examples of what happens when the value of limits is embraced, not as a loss, but as a gain. On a personal level, balancing freedom with self-limitation feels like a choice. On a collective level, it starts to feel like an ethic, a way of living that honors both individual liberty and the shared need for boundaries that protect our time, our attention, and our humanity. When a community gets that balance right, it's like a song in harmony. No one instrument overwhelms the others, yet each voice is free to shine. The more I've listened to the wisdom of American meditation teachers and the timeless teachings of the Buddha, the more I see that freedom and self-limitation are not enemies. They are partners in the same dance. each one giving the other its meaning. Freedom without limits drifts into chaos. Limits without freedom harden into prison. But when the two meet in balance, life feels both expansive and steady, like standing on a wide open shore with your feet planted firmly in the sand. In my own life, I've learned this not through grand revelations, but through small, quiet choices. Turning off my phone at night, saying no to a project that doesn't align with my values, choosing to sit in meditation instead of chasing the next distraction. Every one of those moments is a reminder. I am free, not because I can have everything, but because I can choose what truly matters. We live in a culture that often measures life by how much we can fit into it. But maybe the deeper measure is how much space we can leave. Space for breathing, for noticing, for simply being. The Buddha's teachings on the middle way, Jack Kornfield's gentle reminders, Sharon Salzberg's emphasis on loving kindness, Jon Kabat-Zinn's call to live fully in each moment, all point to the same truth. Real freedom comes from knowing when to open your hands and when to hold them still. This isn't about perfection. Some days you'll overfill your schedule. Some days you'll give in to impulse. That's okay. Mindfulness isn't about never straying. It's about noticing when you do and coming back again and again to the life you want to live. And that brings me back to why mindfulness exists. It's not here to hand you rigid rules or lofty ideals. It's here to offer a space, a gentle nudge, and a reminder that you already have the capacity to choose with intention. To say yes when it nourishes you. To say no when it drains you. To live in the sweet spot where freedom and limits meet, and where the truest version of your life can finally breathe. Because in the end, freedom isn't about running everywhere at once. It's about being fully here, exactly where you choose to be. Do you